April 11, 1977, Monday morning in Krugersdorp, South Africa. When Standard Bank staff opened the branch after the long Easter weekend, they found something impossible. The vault was open, and hundreds of safe deposit boxes had been emptied. Cash, jewelry, and valuables worth more than $400,000 were missing. Police were alerted at once. When detectives walked through the strong room, they struggled to make sense of what they saw. There were no signs of a break-in through the front door. No alarms had gone off. No guards had been confronted. It was as if someone had simply walked in and taken the loot. But nothing about this theft was ordinary. It soon became obvious that this was not a typical bank robbery. The perpetrators had not forced the front doors, smashed a window, or fired a weapon. Instead, they had dug a tunnel from a nearby rented shop straight under the street and into the vault. They had avoided detection by police and neighbors for months. Who were the people capable of planning and executing such a precise break-in from below ground? And how did they finish one of the most unusual bank thefts in South African history without ever being caught? This story explores exactly that. The Krugersdorp bank robbery. The discovery. On Easter weekend, April 8, 1977, a quiet stretch of human street in Krugersdorp woke to a fact that would not leave it for decades. A bank vault had been emptied from below. The thieves had not stormed the front doors. They had not forced their way in under cover of night the way most robbers do. Instead, they had rented a small shop a few doors down, closed its windows with brown paper, and for months dug a tunnel beneath a row of shops until they reached the strong room wall of the Standard Bank. When staff opened the doors on the Monday after the holiday, the vault lay open and the safe deposit boxes had been stripped. The haul was reported at more than $400,000. At the time, one of the largest bank thefts in South African history, and the case would remain unsolved. Human Street had long been a business strip that did its ordinary business by day and emptied at night. The shop the thieves rented presented itself as a new photographic studio. Newspapers plastered the windows. A name, Mr. Nightingale, was used on the lease and in correspondence. That name, and a Johannesburg address supplied to the landlord, would later prove false. To everyone who glanced in the window, the place looked like any other new shop getting a fit-out. Nobody warned the landlord's suspicions because there were none. Closed-up storefronts and brown-papered windows are common in that phase of a new business. Digging the tunnel. They worked slowly and carefully. The shaft into the basement began as a small square hidden behind a trapdoor in the shop's floor. From there, the robbers tunneled under 4 adjacent shops, clearing and timbering the passage as they went, piling the excavated soil into 20 kilos bags and storing it in a rear strong room. The wooden supports kept the roof from falling in. The trapdoor kept the shop floor looking normal. Because construction noise from a nearby building site masked other sounds, and because the bank's trembler alarms had been turned off to avoid false triggers from the compressors nearby, the tunnel went largely unnoticed. It took months to complete. When the gang finally reached the bank's vault wall, they used an oxyacetylene torch to cut through brick and steel, and then worked inside the strong room. Some accounts even say they prepared food there, until they had emptied safe deposit boxes and taken cash, traveler's checks, and jewelry. What makes the Krugersdorp tunnel robbery stand out is not just the haul, but the effort and the ordinary-looking cover. The tunnel measured roughly 20 to 30 meters, depending on accounts, and it passed under several properties to reach the vault. The robbers had planned for the practical problems of tunneling: how to remove soil without drawing attention, how to ventilate the space, how to shore the passage to prevent collapse, and how to conceal days and nights of work inside a rented storefront. They had also planned for the community around them, counting on the fact that people accept new businesses quietly finding their feet. It was a crime of logistics and patience more than of violence. If you read local newspapers from the days after, the reporting alternated between amazement at the workmanship and bafflement at the missing leads. Identikits were drawn from witness statements. Some people reported seeing men in blue overalls moving in and out over the holiday, but nobody reported an obvious team of strangers hauling bags of dirt on the street at night. Brigadier J.F. Roos of Pretoria led the police investigation. Detectives questioned landlords, searched addresses, and tried to trace the fake names. Yet after a flurry of interviews and publicity, the trail went cold. The bank, the police, and the public all had the same unresolved fact. The tunnel had been done, the vault had been opened, the goods had disappeared, and no arrests were made. Breaching the vault. There are parts of this story we will never know with absolute certainty, and that is part of why it sticks in the mind. But the facts we do have make a plain, strong skeleton for a narrative. People planning, patient digging, the mask of legitimate business, a holiday that provided a convenient pause in regular vigilance, an alarm system out of use, a clean escape, and a law enforcement trail that led nowhere. What follows is a reconstruction built from police reports, contemporary newspaper coverage, later retrospectives, and court of public opinion, a full, detailed telling that keeps to what the records say while rendering the moments that would have mattered to anyone who lived through them. They chose their cover with care. A storefront on Human Street, a location close to the bank but not suspiciously close, a name that sounded respectable, a reason for concealed windows, a photographic studio fit-out. The landlord had no cause to complain. When rent checks, forms, and correspondence came through, the shop looked legitimate on paper. The gang understood the neighborhood's rhythms. Shops close over the holiday, work crews and cargo come and go, and a business preparing to open will often have materials and odd hours. This camouflage was the first layer of their plan. Inside the shop, behind the trapdoor, the work began in secret. Men with shovels and picks, wooden poles for bracing, bags for soil. They worked mostly at night, arriving when the street emptied and leaving before day. They stored the soil in sacks near the rear of the shop, a detail that later helped police reconstruct the tunnel's progress. The digging was slow. They had to keep the incline manageable, avoid running into foundations and pipes, and keep the passage wide enough for two people to move and for sacks of dirt to pass. The mechanics of a tunnel are unforgiving. Too steep and soil falls back. Too shallow and the roof gives way. Too fast and noise and dust betray the effort. They found ways around all these problems. On a technical level, the tunnel crew showed a basic understanding of civil engineering. They set timber supports at intervals to prevent collapse. They covered the excavated shaft with a cleverly cut trapdoor so the shop remained normal. They took the soil out in bags rather than wheelbarrows or buckets to limit visible movement in and out of the premises. The bags were heavy and required manpower, yet the movement was sufficiently discreet to avoid alarming neighbors. When they met the bank's foundation, the thieves worked carefully to breach the vault wall without causing a noisy, large-scale collapse or triggering any alarm that might depend on vibration. The oxyacetylene torch was precise. It allowed them to cut into brick or metal over hours without loud explosions or obvious sparks in the street. Why did the bank's alarms not detect the intrusion? The short answer is human judgment and misfortune. The bank's trembler systems were, in the days before CCTV and modern motion sensors, a common tool to detect vibration or unauthorized digging. But on this particular Easter, compressors and heavy equipment at a nearby building site were creating vibrations and noise. Those vibrations had been tripping the alarms. To stop repeated false alarms, someone turned off parts of the system. It is not an accusation, it is a practical explanation. When the robbers made their final breach, the alarm that might have registered the digging was not active. The timing could not have been more favorable for the thieves. On the holiday itself, the tunnel's last stretch was finished. The gang cut through the final wall and entered the bank's strong room. What came next is one of the more vivid details preserved in the records. They used an oxyacetylene torch to cut into safe deposit boxes, but the way they handled their time inside showed a level of calm. Investigators later reported traces that suggested the robbers had prepared food there. Small signs that they were willing to spend hours inside the vault. It was not a hit-and-run job. It was a drawn-out clearing of valuables. The thieves had no need to rush because the alarm was off and the town slept through the holiday. When bank staff returned on the Monday, the scene in the strong room was one of damage and absence. Boxes had been opened and emptied. Cash and travelers' checks were missing. Jewelry had been taken. The sum reported initially was more than $400,000. For context, that amount in 1977 bought far more than it would today. Contemporary retrospectives often translate it into many millions in current terms. More than the money, though, was the shock. The community had known this branch for years. People trusted that the bank's vault was secure. To see that the robbers had not come in over the front but under the street was to realize how exposed an urban center could be when someone set their mind to engineering a breach. The investigation. Police moved quickly. Brigadier J.F. Roos was placed in charge of the investigation out of Pretoria. Investigators photographed the tunnel, measured its length and supports, and documented the methods used to break into boxes. They questioned anyone who could possibly be linked to the rented shop, the landlord, neighboring businesses, and people who might have seen suspicious movements. Identikits were compiled from witnesses who had seen men in work clothing in the area during the holiday. The inquiry chased down the false address given on the lease and tried to trace the alias Mr. Nightingale. But aliases and dead-end addresses are common in criminal schemes. The longer the search went on, the more the trail thinned. Journalists arrived to photograph the tunnel and print the cave-in of a normal shop floor. The images were dramatic. A neat trapdoor opened to a long, timbered passage, disappearing under the city. Photographs of the tunnel made the rounds of South African papers and later turned up in retrospectives. Newspaper coverage at the time and in subsequent years emphasized both the skill of the robbers and the failure of investigators to find the culprits. The narrative settled into a clear pattern. This was a daring, carefully executed theft, and it remained unsolved. Theories multiplied. Some suggested an inside job, someone with intimate knowledge of the bank's layout, its alarms, or the town's rhythms. Others argued that a professional gang had planned this with outside help, an engineer, a surveyor, a person who knew how to disguise a business. There were whispers about who might have profited from the valuables and whether the loot had been fenced through channels that crossed provincial lines, or even borders, but such theories rarely advance without hard evidence. For years, tips and rumors surfaced and then fizzled. The police files, where accessible in retrospectives, show points of interest that never turned into prosecutions. If you imagine the robbers leaving Krugersdorp the way they came, through that trapdoor and back into a regular street, you get one version of the escape. More likely, they staged their exit carefully. Bags of looted cash and jewels are heavy and risky to move. They needed vehicles, secure hands to carry loads, and fences to pass the goods to. The record does not show a dramatic high-speed departure or a shootout. Instead, it implies a network. People who would receive and redistribute stolen property, transporters who would take goods out of town, and contacts in places where traceable items could be quickly converted to untraceable funds. The heist's success depended as much on this quiet logistics as on the tunnel itself. Aftermath and legacy. For the bank and for local business owners, the robbery left behind practical consequences. Standard Bank, publicly embarrassed and materially harmed, had to answer questions about security. Banks studied the incident and revised policies on alarms, backups, and surveillance. The community's sense of safety took a hit. Customers wondered how secure their deposits were when someone could dig under a street and walk out with the contents of a vault. That worry was real, even if most customers had no immediate danger. The robbery changed attitudes toward bank security across the region. And yet the human story is also in small details. Consider the landlord who rented out the shop. He received correspondence to a Johannesburg address that turned out to be false. He later said he had intended to return the mail but forgot, and by the time he looked again, it was too late. Think of the men who worked in the tunnel, holding up the ceiling with wooden poles, eating in the vault, and avoiding daylight for months. Think of the bank clerk arriving on a Monday morning to find a breach that had been engineered with patience. Those are the images that stick because they are specific and tangible, ordinary people, put in a moment they did not expect. Over the following years, the Krugersdorp robbery became a case study in how criminals can use time as a tool. Modern readers who are used to CCTV footage and digital trails might find it hard to accept that a team could tunnel under a street and remain unseen. But in the 1970s, without the plenum of cameras and sensors that cities now have, this kind of long con approach was possible. It required patience, discipline, and the willingness to plan around normal human behaviors, holidays, construction noise, and the everyday assumption that new shops are what they claim to be. Public fascination never faded. The robbery inspired articles, radio shows, and later web retrospectives. Local historians and crime writers revisited the story on anniversaries. Each retelling added interviews, recollections, and sometimes conflicting details, but the outline stayed the same: the tunnel, the masked shop, and the vanished loot. In reviews of South Africa's great heists, Krugersdorp is often placed alongside other audacious thefts worldwide. It stands not only for the scale of the takings, but for the way ordinary settings can conceal extraordinary planning. If this story kept you hooked, drop a comment and share your thoughts on how you think they pulled it off. And hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more real crime stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.